Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we're looking at something that honestly might seem a bit unexpected. I mean, at first glance, bureaucratic rules usually just look like dry, endless pages of text, right? But when you look closely at India's 2001 slaughterhouse rules, this incredible, meticulous architectural blueprint starts to appear. It's literally a spatial and procedural map designed to balance the harsh realities of industrial food production with a deeply structured commitment to animal welfare. We're going to walk through this facility step by step, strictly through the lens of the source material. But to really grasp why these rules are so intensely detailed, we have to start with the philosophy behind them. As this profound quote from Mahatma Gandhi reminds us, these kinds of bureaucratic regulations don't just pop up out of nowhere. They're built on a deeply moral and philosophical foundation. The 2001 rules essentially attempt to take this exact sentiment and institutionalize it, embedding empathy directly into concrete stainless steel and everyday operating procedures.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for the explainer. We'll start with the law and its purpose, then move into rules for slaughter eligibility, check out the arrival and resting grounds, examine the humane slaughter procedures, look at building and sanitation standards, and wrap up with personnel and oversight.
So, Section 1, the law and its purpose.
Before we even walk through the gates of this blueprint, we've got to establish exactly what kind of facility this 2001 legislation actually targets. The law provides a very specific definition. Not every local small-scale butcher shop falls under these massive regulatory requirements. Instead, the law is explicitly targeting larger industrial operations, specifically any duly licensed facility processing 10 or more animals per day. Once a facility hits that 10-animal threshold, every single rule we're about to discuss applies to them in full force.
Moving right along to Section 2, Rules for Slaughter Eligibility.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how explicitly the law protects vulnerable animals from even entering the food production system in the first place. Imagine we're at the very first spatial checkpoint, the gates of the facility. To even be permitted inside, an animal absolutely must have a fitness certificate from a registered veterinary doctor. But look at the prohibited list here. No animal that's pregnant, no animal with an offspring under 3 months old, and no animal that is under the age of 3 months itself can be slaughtered. It establishes this firm biological boundary before the animal even sets foot on the property.
Next up, Section 3, Arrival and Resting Grounds.
Once an animal is cleared to enter, the legislation dictates exactly how they're treated right upon arrival in the reception areas and lairages. And this number is absolutely crucial: 12. The law states that a veterinarian doctor is strictly capped at examining a maximum of 12 animals per hour. That scales to no more than 96 animals in a single day. By mathematically guaranteeing that doctors have 5 full minutes per animal, the legislation ensures there's no way they can rush the inspections. Each animal gets proper, focused medical attention to make sure they're fit and not suffering from any contagious diseases. And here's another vital number: 24. Every single animal, after passing that initial vet inspection, has to go to a lairage, which is basically a resting pen, for a mandatory 24-hour resting period before slaughter. This incredibly strict rule is entirely focused on minimizing animal stress, giving them time to hydrate, feed, and just calm down after being transported.
And they aren't just resting anywhere. The legislation dictates the exact spatial dimensions. Large animals are legally guaranteed at least 2.8 square meters of space, and small animals get 1.6 square meters. On top of that, the rules mandate that these areas must have overhead protective shelters to shield the animals from heat, cold, and rain. And they even have to include dedicated separate isolation pens for any animal that might be suspected of being sick.
Which brings us to Section 4, Humane Slaughter Procedures.
We're now moving from the resting grounds onto the main slaughter floor. The legislation regulates this really delicate terminal phase with incredibly strict, unyielding procedures. So the crucial point is right here in Rule 6, Sub-Rule 1. No animal shall be slaughtered in sight of other animals. Think about that for a second. The architecture must literally blindfold the animals from the process. The slaughter halls have to provide separate sections of adequate dimensions just to ensure this visual separation. It's a spatial design choice mandated entirely to prevent psychological distress in the remaining animals.
Let's break down how this physically looks. The law chops the process into distinct, isolated steps: stunning, bleeding, and dressing. So, for example, bleeding has to happen in a curbed-in area so that blood cannot physically splash onto other animals. And the dressing of carcasses, the removal of hides and skin, cannot be done on the floor. Hides have to be immediately transported away using closed wheelbarrows or self-closing chutes. Literally nothing is left lying around to cause distress or contamination. So we've seen how meticulously the flow and treatment of the animals are regulated, right? But that raises a really interesting question. How is the physical building itself controlled to actually support all of this? That takes us to Section 5, Building and Sanitation Standards. See, the 2001 rules don't just care about the process. They demand rigid engineering and architectural standards for the facility itself. The very material science of the building is highly regulated. Porous materials like wood or acoustic boards, completely banned. They absorb bacteria and are a nightmare to clean. Floors have to be impervious and non-slippery. Walls must be smooth and washable up to 2 meters high. Even the corners of the rooms are regulated. They're mandated to have rounded coves with a minimum radius of exactly 100 millimeters. Why? Because sharp corners accumulate dirt, while rounded coves promote supreme sanitation. And this brilliantly illustrates how the text even dictates the architecture of the windows. Uncolored glass with high light transmissibility has to make up roughly 25% of the floor area of a workroom. This is just to ensure there's adequate natural light. And where natural light fails, artificial light must be distributed at specific intensities, cranked all the way up to 500 lux at the meat inspection stations.
Of course, sanitation requires water, and the rules are incredibly specific here too. Floor washing requires water pressure of 200 to 330 kilopascals, but for the thorough washing of the carcasses, that pressure has to massively jump to between 1,000 and 1,700 kilopascals. The rules also mandate a constant supply of clean hot water at no less than 82 degrees Celsius specifically for frequently sterilizing the equipment.
To further guarantee safety, certain materials are strictly banned in edible product zones. You're not going to find any copper, cadmium, lead, enamel, or painted surfaces touching the product. Also, all permanently mounted equipment has to be installed at least 300 millimeters away from walls and above the floors. This guarantees that the cleaners and inspectors have complete unobstructed access to wash away every single trace of debris.
Finally, we arrive at Section 6, Personnel and Oversight. A building is literally only as good as the people running it and the authorities inspecting it. So, the humans on the floor are subject to strict requirements as well. No one under the age of 18 is permitted to be employed in any manner within the slaughterhouse. Every single person engaged in slaughtering must possess a valid authorization from the local authority. And most importantly, they have to be completely free of any communicable or infectious diseases. This protects both the hygiene of the facility itself and, of course, the integrity of the food that ends up on our tables. But the real teeth of this legislation, that lies in its enforcement mechanism. The Animal Welfare Board of India, or organizations they authorize, have the legal power to inspect any slaughterhouse completely without notice. They can literally just walk in at any time during working hours. If they find violations of anything we've discussed today, they send reports straight to the authorities to initiate legal proceedings. It's this constant threat of unannounced inspections that forces these facilities to maintain these rigorous standards every single day.
As we bring our spatial journey through the 2001 Slaughterhouse Rules to a close, it's fitting to look at another foundational quote, this time from Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. These rules, with their precise square meterage, water pressure mandates, and blindfolded slaughter lines, they're really the bureaucratic translation of this exact idea. It's an attempt to mandate a basic, unyielding level of kindness and respect within an industrial system.
Which leaves us with this final, thought-provoking question. We've seen the impressive blueprint, we've read the strict regulations regarding space, sanitation, and humane treatment, but can strict bureaucratic architecture truly guarantee empathy in industrial food production? It's a really complex question about the intersection of law, design, and animal welfare, and it's definitely one that is well worth pondering. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the design of the world around you.